August 18th, Pikes Peak Area Council of Government Transportation Advisory Committee. Looks like we have a quorum, so I'll start with introductions. Jennifer Irvin, El Paso County.
Darren Horsemeyer, Street Rare Full Space.
Greg Blewett, City Power Springs, Mountain Metro.
Greg Casper, PPACG.
Wendy Pettit, CDOT Region 2.
Michael Snow, CDOT BTD. Wade Holder, Manchester.
Tim Roberts, City of Colorado Springs.
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County.
Hi, Jim.
Hannah Stevens, PPACG.
Kevin Reyes, PPACG.
You got everybody?
Dwayne just walked in. Dwayne?
Dwayne?
Greenwood, City of Fountain.
You have the agenda before you.
Yeah, almost.
Do you have any changes to the, and I would say probably the new agenda, right, Craig?
Yes, there's a new agenda. It's functionally the same as the old one, just some names have changed on who's taking different items. And there's also on the table is a new draft version of the public participation plan. It's a work in progress.
So I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Alrighty. Public comments. This is the time for anybody who has any comments for any item that is not on today's agenda. I don't see anybody rushing forward, so go ahead and move on to item number 4, approval of the July 21st, 2016 meeting minutes. Has everybody read those, and are there any suggested changes?
I wasn't here, so.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Board of Directors report, August board meeting.
Well, the key discussion was on the 10-year priority development list and priority project list. And after a longer than expected discussion on the item, the boards recommended the projects. On the tax recommendation, that was $5 million for US 24 West and $45 million for I-25 North. They voted to split it 25 and 25 and send that to CDOT.
Craig, did they actually, I don't remember that they formally voted, did they?
Did they formally vote, or was it just a
Recommendation.
recommendation?
I don't know, it was kind of
Yeah.
weird.
So,
Because they have one more time to see it for a
yeah.
formal
And it's not
vote.
what CDOT put down anyway, so I'll give you that information here shortly.
All right.
So.
Anything else, any other questions that anybody has? Item number 6, 2017 to 2022 TIP amendment, change number 1. Kevin Reyes, transportation planner, and this is it really informational?
It's an administrative change, so
Okay,
we didn't have actually a formal
that's right.
amendment this month.
Hi, everyone. Kevin Reyes, Transportation Planner with PPACG. So yeah, we have the administrative change number 1 to the TIP. So it comes in actually 3 different parts. So the first part is coming to us from CDOT. And so if you guys remember from amendment number 1 and amendment number 2, in the TIP, we received new federal funding totals for CMAQ, TAP, and STP Metro from the FAST Act. And so because we received those new funding totals, we had to move some projects around in the TIP to keep it fiscally constrained. There was a few projects that we were unable to fix at that time, so we were able to fix those over the past couple weeks. The first one is Charter Oak Ranch Road. And so we were able to keep the TIP fiscally constrained by moving some of the funding years in this project. So if you look at attachment number 2 that you guys had, it'll show exactly what we did with this project. Let me just get to it. Here we go. Okay, so as you can see on the bottom here are the old numbers. You can see for Charter Oak Ranch Road, it has funding in 2018 for $1,300,000. We moved that funding into 2017, which automatically moved the local match over there. And then on the old numbers, again, you can see in 2019 has just over $3 million funded. But what we did is we split that into 2 years. We moved that into 2018 and to 2020. So in the new numbers, 2019 has no funding for Charter Oak Ranch Road. And again, we did that to keep it fiscally constrained. So that's the first part of that. The second part is for Sand Creek Trail, Palmer Park to Constitution. So for this project, we moved some stuff because with the end of Map 21, that means Map 21 ended, which means that the enhancement funding expired. So CDOT was able to make that money whole by trading it out and putting it on the Sand Creek Trail Palmer Park project. So if you look at attachment number 3, you can see that we put that money on this project. So if you look at the old numbers, you can see here for the federal EPP, it had $186,000. CDOT let us know that it now has $593,000 for the rollover, which automatically changed the local match to $148,000. And then we actually adjusted the Regional 2 TAP and Region 2 local. Those were incorrect in the previous TIP version, so we updated that as well. So that's the second part that we received from CDOT for the administrative change. So the third part, second part of the administrative change is for the TIP air quality conformity language. So the EPA reviewed the air quality conformity language in Chapter 15 of the 2040 Long Range Plan, and they decided that that language is more current and more up-to-date and more accurate. So they actually asked us to change the air quality conformity language in Appendix C to reflect the language of the 2040 air quality language. So basically all I did was updated the TIP language to be more consistent with Chapter 15 of the Long Range Plan. And then Part 3 of the administrative change is actually not on your memo. We received it from El Paso County, and they are requesting an administrative roll forward for the Struther Water Mitigation Project on I-25 at Northgate. And I want to make sure I got these numbers correct. I'm not sure if you guys use the same decimal system as us, but I have 1 million state RPP and $1,185,000 local. Is that correct? Okay, perfect.
That's a big local match.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that. Okay, perfect. So we put that in the rollover for this project. That's not on in your memo, but that is one other thing that we did for the TIP. Do you guys have any questions on the administrative changes that we did?
Thank you for processing the administrative one so quickly.
Oh, yeah, no problem at all.
And while we had to move Charter Oak Ranch Road out of 2019 to keep 2019 fiscally constrained, we would love to find somebody to swap some funding with us in either 2018, actually ideally 2018 or 2019, because that, obviously you can't construct half a project in 18 and then wait till 20 to finish it, so we are certainly looking for somebody to swap some funding around with us, so please keep that in mind as you go forward with your projects. We'd appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
With that, I'll move approval.
Thank you.
Oh, this is an information one. We don't have to move approval. Sorry, got confused.
Any other questions, concerns? Thanks, Kevin. You're doing a great job. And just want to note at the board, Kevin was also recognized, and just want to thank Wendy for all her help too. She's been doing a great job making sure that we finally get our plan that's fiscally constrained. So, there's no further issues on that. We'll go to item number 7. CDOT 10-year development program on priority list. This is a review and recommend item.
And this is the same item as you had last month. Two things have changed since last month. One is the board said that $50 million that's combined between US 24 West and I-25 North should be split. That was the recommendation. They gave that to CDOT, and CDOT said that they would email us the list. Robert, we didn't get it, but Wendy just gave it to me. So what's the second thing that's changed is CDOT went through and looked at actually what projects are in US 24 West, and so what they've put in to the commission as the draft list has $15 million for US. Oh, it hasn't? Okay, but it will be for the next board. So $15 million for US 24 West, $35 million for I-25 North, which is the 50, and then the $45 million we talked about before on I-25 South, $40 million on Powers Boulevard in the central part for intersections, and then $30 million on the Research Parkway interchange. So it's the same projects, the difference, and I only have this in hard copy because Wendy just gave it to me, sorry. I can make a copy. Actually, you know what I will do? Oh, is it copies? I thought this was all one. Sweet. She's on top of it, way more than I am. So I will just take one, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, here, pass those out. Start these around, and so you can see then what the list is. And then on this list 2, sorry.
Is that the tier 1?
That's the tier 1, yes, and that's on tier 2, we have US 24 East for $35 million. And that's all I see on tier 2 in our area.
So does that mean, I mean, at one point we had all.
Oh, wait.
They're on the back.
Oh, they're on the back. Sorry, yep. And then there's $105 million on 24 West 8th Street to 31st Street. $13 million on Powers down by Proby. $65 million for the HOV lane. $270 million on 24 West, I-25 to Ridge Road, in addition to the $175 million on Powers North, and $30 million on for the freeway section. So you can see that on the back. Sweet. Perfect. Which is what Rob had promised us for that the tier 2 that our environmental documents, what was left on those would go on there. So we can now actually see that did happen, which is awesome.
I'll email it to you.
Thank you.
Craig, I think you had a question.
Just in 25 words or less, what's the difference between tier 1 and tier 2?
They're both made up money, but tier 1 is likely to be included in the ballot initiative any ballot initiative that goes forward.
Okay. And these are only highway projects?
These are the critical transportation projects.
State highway.
Is it
No.
state highway?
These are only state highway projects.
Yes.
They're not all of our project priorities for the region.
Yeah, because our board has a longer list.
But it's state funded.
Yeah, this is what my understanding. You know as much as I. This is the list that CDOT is using for any ballot initiative.
Okay, so it's unfunded projects.
This is a list of completely unfunded projects,
And Rob calls it monopoly money.
and it is.
The only reason I say that is because on the transit side, there's Senate Bill 228 funds, and there are some projects in this region that are planned for park and ride improvements.
Yes.
They
And
have real money, though.
the
What's that?
transit.
Those have real money,
real
though.
money.
Yeah.
Is there a transit list also?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll see if I can get my hands on
Yeah,
it.
if you could send that, that'd be really interesting for me to see.
Yeah, I've always been told that, we'll be doing the same thing for transit. We'll be doing it for like PED type of things, but we're not there. I mean, we've kind of started with this sort of, the highway system kind of project to bring it together. And then I don't know anything further about the when we'll be asking for sort of.
And one thing that came up, one thing that came up is that this list will be updated every year. There will be some sort of process to go through to re-verify and make any changes to it as we go forward, so that it's a living list of made-up projects.
Craig, did CDOT update the Dr. Cog description for I-25 North?
I don't know the answer to that, but I'd be very interested to see. Yeah, we call it I-25 North. They call it I-25 South.
Whatever they're on it.
So,
It has the same tag as the 7th Park Corridor because that is the 7th Pot Corridor, and it was I-25 south to them.
Okay.
That's how I got that.
Well,
But is the description-
was just related to managed lanes versus,
Oh, yeah, that's
versus
the issue.
really what is the
Yeah.
outcome of the PEL,
Right.
which is what I think it should be.
Right.
Yes.
I have to follow up with Bob, and I'll make a note to do that.
Thank you for checking on that.
Yeah, and while we're on the I-25 topic, I guess there was an internal meeting last week or early this week, and so they will be moving forward with outreach for the technical committees, and they know that we are very strongly interested in having representation on that committee, so we will be getting contacted on it. So,
Sorry, thought of another follow-up with what Michael said. So if we're looking at a ballot issue, I know there's been discussion that ballot issues do hold better if they're multimodal. So the expectation is at some point that we'll be talking about other modes in terms of what might be on a ballot issue?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
Craig, I mean, most of the environmental assessments that are done include multimodal. So, I mean, on these roads, even though they identify, for example, the US 24 East study identifies a park and ride facility. So I think that beyond just the bus thing, but I
Right.
think most of these environmental assessments identify kind of a whole range of multimodal.
yeah, and US 24 West has the improvements to the bike trail, through, actually, I think it's through Manitou.
And the managed lane would be accommodate transit and
Right.
carpools and van pools and all kinds of stuff.
So right now, the tax recommendation is the 5 and 45, which will go forward if you don't make a change. Or you can make a change to whatever else. Like I said, the board went with 25-25. CDOT has submitted 15-35 because that's what they see as more project realistic. But it's your pleasure.
Libby, one question that happened at the board, and I don't know if you know the answer to it, was the identification of the Congressional Corridor on this sheet. Is that ever clarified?
Yeah, well, not there,
Uh-huh.
but we just thought we'd bring it, there were a couple other questions that are sort of funding program questions that we're going to bring it back next month. But the question was, what does it mean to be a congressional corridor? Essentially, that is a corridor that's been identified in any previous congressionally created programs. So some freight corridor programs that were created but are no longer funded might have identified certain corridors like the Ports to Plains, the
Heartland
Camino
Expressway.
del Real, the Heartland Expressway. All those are different corridors that have been prioritized in previous sort of special funding programs. So their significance means nothing really explicitly right now, other than, that program 12 years ago, let's say, was really geared towards certain type of freight mobility, and there's a corridor that was identified. So that might help us we have statewide conversations about prioritizing corridor improvements in the future. If that makes sense. Or we can just say, well, those mean nothing, and that was where. Why we hang on to it, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's really that helpful, but we do.
One suggested change is I-25, the Pikes Peak version of I-25 North should have an X in the NHS corridor. And probably in the Congressional corridor because it's part of the Camino del whatever. Sorry, it's in the middle. It's the Pikes Peak area. It's the first one that's only Pikes Peak area. It's I-25 North PEL in progress. If you follow that across, it's maintain the system, mobility, safety, economic vitality. It's also an NHS corridor because it's the interstate. And it's also a congressional corridor because it's the Camino del, or whatever that one is.
Be multimodal.
So, and yeah, I don't know how they figured out the rest of it, but those two for sure, it would be.
Access too, I mean, it accesses Fort
Yeah, and, yeah. So, just some suggestions.
Can you look at all of the projects, with more time
Say again?
prior to the board meeting? Can you look at this, the check boxes for all the projects prior to the
Yeah.
board meeting?
So, I mean, the important thing to recognize, and I think you see it as, is, just based on the conversation here, is a lot of this is sort of designations that at some point might, let's say a funding program comes about that has specific focus to it. It helps us to do a quick query of this very long list to say, here's what we think would qualify. So it is important that we are looking at this stuff now and make sure that those designations are there, otherwise we might miss it at the first pass, or say, show us the list of projects that would qualify for, say, X, So please take the time now, and that feedback can go straight to Rob or to Wendy or to me or whatever. This is, there's not going to be like debate on whether or not this qualifies here, because the real test is when you actually have funding and you really do some type of project identification for funding. You're going to do a real serious sort of criteria check on it and come to agreement at that time.
Specifically, I-25 North, I also see here a column for, probably wasn't really looked at closely, but TPR and slash region priority, and that there's been some discussion about making I-25 North this region's highest priority.
And it says it's not in our fiscally constrained plan because
It's not in.
our area. So I would, maybe replace that with high regional priority.
So, I think it's sort of a special situation,
Right.
isn't it?
Yep.
I mean, obviously, you wanted to capture what regional plans are saying in just this column, but, more importantly, what does this mean for a future conversation anyway? If something's out of fiscal constraint, it's because we have no funding identified, but if you get funding identified,
It would be good.
opens a conversation anyway.
Right. It's just like North Front Range just did with their Tiger grant they got. They're
Yeah.
putting that project in the plan now.
Because somehow it's just kind of captures that uniqueness.
So, anyway, those are suggestions.
Is US 24 a big corner?
Freight, it is US 24 from I-25 east to I-70 is considered a freight corridor in the CDOT plan, but it is not from I-25 west into the mountains.
That's because
That's part of the-
all
some of the-
truck routes lead to Lyman.
Just a side note, at our Central Front Range meeting, we requested that the US 24 West just be designated as the Pikes Peak area. Since that project stops at Woodland Park, it's not in the Central Front Range. So CDOT agreed to make that change too.
Okay.
Do you want to do a priority nomination too?
Is there any further discussion? Any motion?
Just want to make sure the county and Woodland Park are okay with the reduction in the US 24 West. Okay.
I don't know that City of Woodland Park is okay with it, but we understand it.
Okay. Right.
I'll move approval as presented with the changes that were given to CDOT today, as presented with the new funding totals.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion on that?
I'll ask the group a question. Do we want to put a priority to I-25 North as our number one project, or is that not appropriate at this time?
I would argue against that being the priority, actually.
Kathleen would.
Yes, she would. Research Parkway is kind of big for us.
She argued at the
And
last
you
meeting.
actually have a much more substantial and formal time to do that, and that is when you actually have some funding to consider, so. I think that extra sort of designation right now wouldn't make any difference to just what we're doing here. I mean, it's pretty
think that would add one more column and it'd go off the sheet.
Or another alternative, just since we're having some discussion about it, is that, we did recommend to the board last time that there was some discussion about a separate resolution identifying that. Maybe that's something to consider in a motion.
And based on my conversation with Mark Andrew about the internal meeting, I think that would carry some weight too, because I don't think they knew how important we view that project. So.
Okay, priority for a later time then, so.
But something that the board should send up to Region 1 and say, just so you know, this really does matter very deeply to us. So.
Any further discussion? Anything from the audience? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Item number 8, public participation plan. Rachel Beck, our policy and communications manager. The action request is a recommended release for 45-day public comment.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You've already given away my name and title. I don't know what to do with myself. Thank you. I want to apologize for sending you a revised version of the public participation plan at such a last-minute time. We've done this a lot differently this time around than the last public participation plan, and so that generated a lot of internal discussion. And we also had a great conference call with Aaron yesterday, and he gave us a lot of good suggestions. Thank you. So I think what you have before you is a better product. I hope you'll agree. And we also wanted to make sure that what you had was what we are actually asking you to recommend to the board be released for the 45-day public comment period. So a few things I want to draw your attention to. As part of the beginning of the process of doing this document, we reviewed a number of best practices, some research reports, talked to some vendors, looked at plans from other major metropolitan areas, and what you see there is some of the key takeaways that we identified. Things like outreach efforts should be tailored to the community of interest, less general, more specific to who you're trying to reach to make sure that you're speaking their language. You'll hear this one throughout the plan. We're really moving away from relying solely on public meetings in order to gather community input and have those conversations. Technology has meant that people can participate and expect to participate in a lot of different ways. It's much more convenient. It allows us to go to them instead of asking them to come to us. And just that one simple step can increase participation significantly. And I know a lot of you have been integrating a lot more electronic techniques into your outreach as well, so you've experienced that firsthand. And then moving into page 5, we've got a list there where we've specifically identified a number of audiences. The nature of transportation planning is that our audience is very broad. Transportation touches everyone. But the trouble is, when you talk about, we can't reach everyone, certainly not in just a general and widespread fashion. In order to get the most participation and reach the most people, we've got to segment our audiences, and then we know where to find them and what techniques will be the best for reaching them. So that is what we've done here with this list. Each group will probably receive slightly different outreach, tailored to where they are and what they expect. Most of that list is pulled directly from federal regulations, actually, which guide public outreach for transportation plans. And then just following that section are the strategies that we've identified to reach our goals. A couple of those that I want to point out. The first one, as Craig said, really sums it up. We want to make this convenient for people. We're going to use a wide variety of tactics because we have a wide variety of stakeholders with different needs and different preferences. And on that note, I really have to pat Aaron on the back for this one. We were all talking yesterday, and we thought, well, why don't we just ask people what they want? So often we just guess or we try and diversify for the sake of covering all our bases, but we have the tools now that we can ask people. What do you want to know? How do you want to know it? So our plan is to do that as a kickoff as we start the transportation plan process, and then respond to those results. And then a couple up from the bottom there, another one that you'll see frequently throughout this plan is we'd like to put the focus on using more visualization techniques. Transportation planning can be complicated. Federal regulations can be very complicated. And in the past, we've maybe relied a little too heavily on text to explain that. And we heard that from this committee during the last process, as well as from our Community Advisory Committee, that we really need to simplify and we need to visualize so that people can grasp some of these concepts a little more quickly. So that's going to be something that we'll really stress throughout this next process. Moving on to page 9. You've seen the list of the tactics that we will be using as appropriate, and then on page 9, we've really talked a lot about how we're going to evaluate the effectiveness of those techniques, both as a whole and then on an individual basis. We really hope that that'll allow us to be as efficient and effective as possible. That's all I wanted to highlight to you. Questions, comments, happy to talk in detail about anything else in here. We'd appreciate your suggestions for improvement. Other thoughts?
I just want to point out one substantive change that is in here is we say a month instead of 30 days because we've run into multiple times where from one board meeting to the other is not 30 days. So then we end up doing something, taking 2 months to do it. So that's, I guess, a substantive change. Instead of 30 days, we're saying a month. So.
I'm going to just tap into your page 4 here.
Mm-hmm.
Where you say tapping into community networks that already exist. On page 8, you could actually put member government standing committees on there as well. But
Okay.
don't feel like you need to make that change before you let it out for public comment. That's my first public comment for you.
Okay, thank you. That's a good suggestion.
But also very wise to move away from the public meetings. They're becoming far more expensive for the number of people that you can touch, and it's a great idea to move away to other techniques.
Mm-hmm.
I have one from the transit side. There's probably some language we need to add to this just to cover our bases with regard to our FTA requirements, that we as the grantee rely on them, on PPACG for our public participation process for the TIP. And there's some language that we actually has to be included in the advertisements, whether they're electronic or paper or whatever. So if I could just work with you to give you that language. What we really need, Craig, actually, for our last triennial is we need to work with you guys to formalize an agreement that states that grantee relies on MPO for that process.
Yeah, and we actually, our whole MOA needs to be updated.
Yes.
So we're going to get things on that if we don't do it.
So when we do that, we need to do that as well, but all the advertisements need to say specific language that says this public notice also serves as public notice for the FTA sections 5307, blah, 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 blah. We actually need to update that list.
Okay.
And if possible, if we could reflect these comments in the minutes for today's meeting, that would help us as well. We missed a finding by this much because we didn't have that agreement in place, but we had records showing that we participate in the public participation plan and requested the language we put in there. So if we could do that for the meantime until we have that agreement, that would be really, really helpful.
Okay.
So,
I have a note to follow up with you on that.
okay,
Thank you.
Because what you're asking here is to put this out for 30 days notice, correct?
45, actually.
Okay.
That's what Congress said it should be at least 45 days.
It gets special consideration.
And I'll get that to you ASAP.
Thank you. I'll update that before we take it to the CAC.
So one of the other federal regulations that hasn't been quite fleshed out in this updated report is the explicit consideration of underserved communities.
Mm-hmm.
And we would like to see that developed more.
Do you want that in this plan? We have not previously done that.
Yes.
Okay. So how does that interact with the Title VI plan? I know we sort of touched on this yesterday, but I'm a little unclear.
Yeah, and we can talk more about this offline, but typically what we expect in the public participation plan is consideration of underserved communities and finding out how they want to be interacted with and different things. So I was talking with Craig, and he said that you guys have been to citizen groups that represent these communities, and they have said certain ways in which you can get them to be involved more, which aren't typical for most populations. So, when meetings are, where meetings are, who are better representatives for their community than maybe others, things like that, and just how you're proactively looking for ways to engage them.
Is that level of detail appropriate for a plan that's going to last 4 years? I mean, I imagine some of those meetings and representatives are going to change over that time.
The people might, but the positions wouldn't.
I'm not sure that's true in our community.
Well, I'm not an expert on your community.
Yeah.
That's true, Rachel.
And like I said, we can talk more about this offline, but
Okay.
I'm just making the comment now.
Yeah. We did add a specific mention of those communities in a couple of places, although I don't have gotten down to the level of detail you just mentioned. They're in that audience list on page. Bottom of page 3. We've added in actually almost verbatim the federal language that you sent to us. Seeking out and considering the needs of the underserved, such as low-income and minority households who may face challenges accessing employment and other services.
Mm-hmm. So what are they?
The challenges?
Or the appropriate outreach strategies?
Those are detailed starting on page 6. And then, as I mentioned before, I think the best way to drill down even more on what the answer to that is through the survey that we plan to ask people just that. I'm not sure we necessarily know right now. That's what we have to find out.
So Aaron and I were talking, and one of the goals that I think might work on page 3, I don't know if it's in place or in supplement, was proactively engage the full spectrum of interests with emphasis on low-income and minority populations. So it's sort of, it sort of fits like the third bullet. So it's sort of that one. Ensure that all citizens who wish to have an opportunity and that all ideas are given fair, with emphasis on low-income minority, something like that. Might be just to tweak that goal a little bit. Or as an objective, as a goal.
We'll keep working on that one.
So.
Rachel, one thought I have is, a lot of times people don't really, and I think this is very true of a long-range transportation plan or just our 2040 plan in general, or the 2050, is that people don't really understand what it's used for and how it affects them. And I think that that's something that, especially a lot of as we go through the plan, we address this in kind of chunks and then ultimately adopt the full plan. So it might be good for, as we're looking at, as going forward with public involvement, and I don't know if it needs to be included in this, but just making sure that, as we're asking for input, letting people know how their input affects, an outcome or affects funding or affects, what projects are prioritized. So just a thought. I think that's really, people see advertisements for some of this, please come provide input at meetings, but they don't really understand what their input, the effects of their input. So just a thought.
I absolutely agree. We've talked about some different ways of doing that, and I don't think it made it into the final version here, but we talked about making sure that when we get down to the messaging level, that we make sure that everything is talking about why is this important to me, and what does happen to this input.
Just one more comment. I like this structure better to read than the all-text version that was before.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Is there a motion then?
I will move that the TAC recommends the public participation plan be put out for a 45-day comment period.
I'll second that.
With some of the changes.
Thank you, yes, with changes noted.
And I
You
second that
concur?
too. I concur.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Anything from the audience?
Ken?
Come on, Ken.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Item number 9, 2019 to 2024 tip discussion. Kevin.
Hello, everyone. Kevin Reyes again, Transportation Planner with PPACG. So we're getting ready to kick off our 2019 and 2024 Transportation Improvement Program. And as part of that process, we were hoping to start establishing some policies surrounding the TIP. And we wanted to kind of, we've been kind of brainstorming over the past few weeks amongst ourselves, thinking of some potential policies that maybe we would want to adopt eventually. And I just wanted to run them by everyone today, get some feedback on what we have, and see if you guys have any additional thoughts or comments on potential policies. So the first policy that we've kind of been discussing is projects submitted for the 2019 to 2024 TIP would come from the fiscally constrained list in the 2040 Long Range Transportation Plan. The reason that we thought of this particular policy is because the LRTP provides the foundation for transportation decision-making in the region, and it does that by identifying the needs, the vision, and the goals for regional transportation. And we feel that it's important that the TIP reflect this and implement the plan. So that's the first policy that we've been throwing around, and as you can see on your memo, we've kind of outlined the pros and cons that we could think of surrounding this policy. And so, yeah, if you guys can think of any additional pros or cons, we'd definitely love to hear that. And the second policy that we've been discussing is providing a pot of money for small projects. And so my understanding is that in the past, small projects have struggled to compete with the larger projects when it comes to scoring and getting them in the TIP. So we think that by setting aside a pot of money within STP Metro could help fund smaller projects. And we're proposing to define a small project between $50,000 and $300,000, including both federal and local money. And so we're proposing to set aside $600,000 within STP Metro to fund those projects. The $600,000 would include both federal and local. And the way we came up with that number was basically this amount of money would allow us to get at least one small project per year, or 2 small projects per call for projects. So to kind of put that number in context, $600,000 federal and local and STP Metro would mean that we would be setting aside $496,000 federal, which is about 3% of the STP Metro budget. And one additional part of this policy is that we are proposing that it includes only projects that are doing a full scope of work and not just part of their work. So yeah, and as you can see, again, we outlined for this one we only have a pro. We couldn't think of any cons for this one, but again, wanted to bring it to you guys today as a discussion item, see if you guys could think of additional pros or cons to what we already have, and see what your thoughts are on what we're bringing to you. So,
One con, would there be less money for the I-25 North?
there you go. Okay.
But that's a con to Dr. Cog. So.
When you say it would include only the full scope of work for the project, do you mean full scope of work as far as it may include, it can't be part of another project, or do you mean full scope of work, it includes design and construction? Because, there may be some projects where, an entity could design it internally and only ask for construction funding. So I guess I need to understand what you mean by full scope.
Mm-hmm. So from what we've discussed, we were saying that it would include basically the main phases. So it would include design, right of way, and construction. So it would you couldn't do a part of a project, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what we're trying to avoid with this is not doing $300,000 worth of design on a $3 million project. And so you're getting design out of it. It's like, well, let's actually try to get something with the $300,000 instead
So
of
the
a part.
total cost of the project, including all the different phases, does not exceed $300,000.
Right. So if you design it internally and it's a $300,000 construction cost, perfect.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's just
You
that.
guys, you might want to clarify your language, though.
Yeah.
Okay. I can clarify that.
I wouldn't go much less than $50,000, because then it starts becoming a cost issue.
It's not worth doing a $50,000 project with federal
It's even
funds.
hard to do a $100,000
Well,
project.
well, should we raise it to 100,000 then? Or just, I mean, it's, because it is, especially with super circular and all the rest of the stuff now.
Yeah, yeah, I don't even know that we would do a $100,000 project with federal funds, but we're not going to speak for the smaller jurisdictions, though. What number do you guys think is appropriate?
Again, why not start at zero as your floor?
No.
Because you're going to regret it. We're just going to tell you from experience, you're going to regret it.
It's not like you would do federal funding anyway on all these projects.
No, leave it at 50.
To me, it's zero.
Okay.
No one supports that.
Four doesn't.
Okay.
50 is what the safe route says, so.
I think it's wise, probably.
Because you're not going to put in a $50,000 project anyway, so, okay.
So how does this play out? When doing the TIP, then, these are projects that are still included in the long-range plan, and that but they're relatively smaller projects, so relatively smaller dollar projects. So when doing the TIP, just as a group, then, we will try to find a spot for a small project in each TIP that's done.
And also that we would need to then create this in the long-range plan. We actually walked this through earlier this week. And so the idea is, $300,000, not to speak for Kevin, because he's the one at the thing, but about $300,000 a year, one or more projects for that. And then for the plan, you just run that out 25 or however many years and say, okay, let's have a pool of this big for small projects that to pull from. And it can be, right now, our long-range plan, we have a lot of non-motorized, sidewalk stuff that is, sort of maintenance, and so it's listed as a program and not as a project. We haven't worked out how that would be. But it's to try to pull in those smaller projects, make them more competitive against some of the bigger ones.
In a process I was involved in some years ago, we were trying to, same issue. You have projects that really score well, you give them points, and the big projects get the most points. But then we looked at the cost, and we actually took the points and divided it by the cost to get a BC ratio.
Yep.
And we said, okay, let's just find a way to fund the projects that have the best bang for the buck,
And-
as well as the projects that just provide the best bang, right?
And we do that as one of our scoring criteria. And then literally, we did take the score and divide it by the cost. And that's one of the, we probably need to be a little more rigorous, a little different with it next time. But, that is, the small projects often have more bang for the buck.
So that would be one way to get there, to identify a project that might be a good one to include this time around, right? Might be.
Yeah.
So long as the weighting on that particular criteria is enough to make a difference.
Right.
This is kind of what I'm more curious about is, what is it that if it's just benefit to cost ratio that makes smaller projects stand out, maybe that's good enough. We just need to talk about how you might weight that. But if there's some other kind of factors that leave smaller projects as not scoring well compared to the rest, and it seems like when you get to that pot of smaller projects, you might also need to be thinking more, do some more thinking on how do you rate them. Rated differently altogether.
But I kind of agree with the principle, because sometimes, small projects get lost, right? And they can really make a difference to somebody. So maybe what you're sort of just suggesting is that as part of the TIP process, that be considered, and as a way to find us. If it's not factored in by the criteria itself, is there a way to work a small project into this?
So,
Any discussion on the first one in relation to projects out of the fiscal plan? Wendy?
Well, I guess I have some concern about how we're going to accomplish this, where the language says must, because there's always something that changes. There's always something that has some influence. So there will always be a need to have some type of flexibility in the process. I think that there should be some floor that we need to use to make sure projects are coming out of the plan, but I just don't, because we do these plans so far out, and then federal law changes, or we have new funding sources that come down through different avenues. And so I think before we paint ourselves in the corner, we need to make sure that we at least leave ourselves some flexibility in the process. So that's the only comment I have.
So you want the must to be should? Or may?
Yeah, something like that. Could,
Or go
can,
back,
will.
or go back to the consistent with, the language that
Yeah.
we've always had.
Or, yeah, something that gives you the ability to have that flexibility when you need it.
In scoring, we've always had scoring that addresses this, so that, projects that are submitted that are part of the plan, if I remember correctly, have always, received a bump just because they were in the plan. So
Yeah, it
I think
was-
that's really addressed already. I mean, we'll look at scoring again through the next process.
right, yeah, and I forget exactly, it used to be that it got, and I'll just make up numbers, 10 points if it was in the long-range plan,
So
5 points if it was in a approved local plan, and 5 points if it was in, or 3 points if it was in something else.
that's kind of already addressed in the way we do today with scoring. To Wendy's point.
And federal law provides for that amending of the long-range plan when new projects come in. It provides for it because sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes things change.
Did you get a Tiger grant for?
Exactly.
Great.
Exactly.
Question, I know in dealing a lot with federal government and contracts, question comes down, can you do this under your current contract? And it always comes down to, as long as it's accounted for in the writing of the contract, if the contract allows for it. So maybe in the 2040 plan itself, it's addressed in terms of how do you deal with the tip and funding of projects to be consistent with the plan, and address that language in the adopted long-range plan.
That's a good idea.
So this is a discussion item today. Any further discussion on those two items? Aaron?
Sorry.
Just as an example, North Front Range, in their last call for projects a couple of years ago, they broke their STP Metro into small city and large city pools. So maybe Craig or his staff could contact them and see how that worked out for them.
See what that gives.
Mm-hmm.
So the El Paso County City pool, and then everybody else pool.
We need 3 pools because they always beat us because they're so much larger. So I want a medium-sized pool then.
And a transit pool.
Just have a Colorado Springs pool?
Come up to the microphone. We're going to make you. Everybody else has to.
Or
You can come to the table, yeah.
You can just sit there and.
I was just going to make the perhaps somewhat obvious comment that kind of one of the reasons that we're proposing this is that if the TIP projects don't come from the plan, there's not really that much point in having a long-range plan. So we're bringing this forward as sort of step one in having a stronger link between our long-range plan and something that actually happens or matters. Does that make sense? if everybody submits whatever local projects they want to have, there's no one who's looking out for the regional planning needs. That's what PPACG is charged with. And so it's really important to establish some kind of link between regional planning and project selection. That's our intention with this.
I'll add to that comment by saying, I mean, the purpose of the TIP is to identify the 5 or 6 year list of projects that are going to implement your long-range plan. So that's the flip side of that same linkage. So that's what I was sort of suggesting, put language in the plan itself that says how the plan is going to be carried out by your TIP and how you will identify projects in your TIP. And if it says it must be in the long-range plan, then it must be in the long-range plan. If it says it's consistent with, you might say what makes it consistent with.
I'll come up with a definition of consistent. We struggle with that. What does consistent mean?
I mean, part of our issue with the last round was that we had been through 3 national disasters since the long-range plan had been adopted. And so we couldn't pull every project out of the long-range plan because we had natural disaster recovery issues to deal with. So we have some concern with making it so strict as a must, whereas giving the points or, extra points to the ones that are in the plan versus ones that are not is a very sound way to acknowledge that we'd like to pull them out of there, but we recognize things change.
Is it onerous to amend the plan?
We did it just this within the last year.
But that would protect the integrity of the plan.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's onerous. I mean, it's paperwork, it's a bureaucratic shuffle. So.
Yeah, going on what Victoria said and what Wendy mentioned is, things definitely come up. It sounds like, obviously, there's a lot of unforeseen circumstances, specifically a couple years ago. My understanding is that the board is able to create waivers for that type of stuff. And, when unforeseen circumstances do come up, they can pass that in response to that type of stuff if that's what I understand. But.
And again, I would say put that in the plan itself and say, what is an extraordinary circumstance? Certainly a national emergency, a national or state level declared emergency could qualify. And you could address other similar things.
Change in law, change in elected officials, change in development patterns.
Change elected officials doesn't count.
There's a lot of things that change priorities.
From the D to the R, maybe not the person. Maybe change the law from the D to the R.
Changing the mayor.
I think one of the things that we're going to have to do is show how our plan and our TIP separately work to achieve our performance measures. So I think one of the things that we need to do then is make sure that the projects that go into the plan, and with a plan, if you put a project in, you have to take the same amount out, we would still achieve the same performance level. I think that maybe that's the consistent with definition is at least we're accomplishing the same consistency of performance goal achievement. And, that would show us consistent.
That's pretty strict. I mean, you could have 2 different projects that are over here. You take one big project out right here because you need to put these 2 other projects in. It doesn't mean that these 2 smaller projects would have the absolute same performance as this one larger project. That seems to be mathematically an incredibly difficult thing to work out.
But they're still achieving.
They're still achieving the goals.
Correct?
Right. They're still achieving towards the goals, but having it be the same level is too strict.
The regulations don't say it has to be the same magnitude.
And
it's just a progression towards the.
Right.
I think that's Victoria's concern.
Right. I'm with you, Aaron. I agree. They certainly have to progress towards, the goals of the plan, but having it be the same level is a little too much.
Another thing we could do is score the projects, like similar as the long-range plan, and just make sure that it's the same cutoff point, that, all the projects that went in were scored at 300. This makes sure, so does a cutoff line, will make sure the projects that are going in would score at least 300 or something, because that way, that's sort of achievement across the board.
I don't understand what you mean.
Well, we score all the projects, and then we go down the line, and when we run out of money, we say, okay, here's where we're cut off. So we score the projects, anything that's new would come in and get scored against those same criteria to see where they fit in to the long-range plan scoring.
Wasn't that what we did last time?
It is, except that projects that went in scored 50 and the previous cutoff line was 300. We didn't really enforce the thing,
At least it was transparent.
It was.
so. But
Whatever you have, a 2019 and 24 tip.
Can you help me understand, I mean, is there some problem that PPACG staff has seen that you're trying to fix with this issue? I'm just trying to understand where this is,
Well, we had 20, these numbers are going to mess up, but we had 23, in November, we adopted a long-range plan, and in February, January, we did the call for projects, and 23 projects were submitted. 19 of those projects were not in the plan, and 2 of them that were submitted and didn't make the cut because they scored badly. So it's in a period of 2 or 3 months, nothing came from the plan.
I would say that the problem is that at this point in time, the long-range plan is completely irrelevant. It's just, it is. If there's not that link between the long-range plan and actual projects that get implemented, you can't show how you're achieving your performance measures, and there's no document or organization that's looking towards regional planning. It's just a facilitated list of projects.
And to clarify, the old planning rules had the requirement that the STIP projects had to be consistent with the policies and objectives of the long-range plan, where the new planning rules get a lot more specific in performance measure alignment.
Well,
On a lighter note, I just say we let Ken be the mediator, since he's been quiet on this whole issue.
I'm up on the next item.
so,
these were 2 items, is there any other items that anybody has some thoughts on as far as some of the tip policies?
yeah, that's actually a really good question. Is there anything else we need?
I guess I'd like to see our policies from the last go-round,
Okay.
because I'm not sure how different these are from what those were. And if there is some particular a section of a federal regulation that we need to be considering during these policies, I'd like to know what that is, so that we could take a look at that too. Because I don't have it memorized like you do.
I don't think any of us have the new ones memorized.
Yeah.
We're still trying,
So
but
if somebody could figure out what exactly that regulation is that we need to consider when developing our policies, that would be awesome to know.
Greg, just my thought on one is our note policy, and I know that that might be controversial, but that's one thing that I think we need to consider. Again, here in the last probably 3 to 6 months, we're having a significant escalation in inflation and costs of services, and so I think that that's something that really needs to be taken into account. We have consultants that aren't posing on projects. We have contractors who are not, or be able to be very picky with their projects, and I think what the region is seeing and probably the state is seeing that, you know, here, even in the last 3 to 6 months, there's been a significant increase in cost of doing the projects that we have in the TIP. So I think that that's something that really needs to be thought of.
I mean, do you, and this is I guess a sidebar question, do you think it's to the extent where maybe what we do for this plan or for this next tip is instead of a call for projects, do that 1 year project? I mean, is it getting, could it be getting to that extent like it did last time, where we just took a year's worth of money and redistributed it to the projects? Is it?
That is certainly something we should consider, I would say, when we get a little bit closer to there.
Okay.
But, yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay.
We have really been, yeah, we've had projects where we hadn't had a single bidder come in.
Okay, well, if you guys think of additional policy ideas or anything that you want to mention here, I can definitely take your comments over the next couple of weeks and then have those ready for the next TAC meeting. If you could just try to send me your comments before the end of the month, I can definitely include those in the next meeting as well. And then, we'll bring this back as another discussion item because we do have a good amount of time before we have to make any sort of decisions on this. So I appreciate all your feedback. Thank you.
Item number 10, discussion of critical urban freight corridors. Discussion item, Ken Prather, Transportation Planner.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. Last month, we had our initial discussion about critical urban freight corridors. And in your memo, there was a summary of the projects that was discussed and proposed by you last month. I will make one correction for the US 24 East. The total distance that's described there from Powers to Albert Road is 15 miles, but there's only 6 miles of that which is inside the urban area that we're allowed to designate. The other is in the rural area. So if you want to change that 15 miles to 6. The rest of the packet or the memo and the attachments are just additional information on designating critical urban freight corridors. I did have a discussion with CDOT yesterday. Let me pass on what I learned. The National Highway Freight Network, which the critical urban freight corridors will be a component of, is separate from the National Multimodal Freight Network. They're separate and independent. I don't know if they're equal or not, but initially it was the desire to designate the critical corridors so that we could get them all incorporated and into the multimodal network, which was going to be approved in December. They are separate. They don't have to be approved in December, but CDOT does want to move ahead since they've already got momentum going and go ahead and continue on schedule to get the designations. The devil's always in the details. Projects in the National Highway Freight Program, which is that $15 million a year that Colorado is going to receive, it can fund projects in 2016 and 2017 that are identified at this point. Beginning in 2018, only projects from the state freight plan can be funded. CDOT is in the process of developing a methodology to select projects, selecting those projects, and revising the state freight plan so that it will include freight projects eligible for this new funding. And their goal is to have that done by the end of next year. So at this point, CDOT's proposing to make an initial designation of both rural and urban critical corridors that would include projects to be funded in 2016 and 2017, and they will not make an attempt to designate the full 80 miles of critical urban corridors or 160 miles of critical rural corridors. Right now, it's just going to be an initial. We've got projects on these, to be funded in 2016 and 17. We'll designate, kind of like the approach that you took last month, where you said, here's an intersection, quarter mile either side. That's our corridor. So it sounded similar to that concept. All I can say is that Dr. Cog has identified 200 Tier 2 miles of freight corridor and 60 Tier 1. And in the time allotted, they don't feel that they can get their 53 entities to prioritize those, so they're going to let CDOT do it on this initial go-around. Grand Valley has identified 6 miles. We've got 14.7. Haven't heard from Pueblo North or North Front Range. But that'll be more of an issue next year when we have to, the state has to stay inside the 80.35 miles. This year, they're looking at just where do we have projects in 2016 and 2017. So that was kind of the gist of the conversation. So kind of what maybe we're looking at now is, are there any other projects that anybody has thought of that they want to add to this list? Maybe we need to prioritize them, if not right now, for this initial designation, but in the ultimate designation for the freight plan, probably ought to do that. So I guess what we need to identify is what's going to be the cost of the projects we've identified and when are they to be funded. Anything that's going to be beyond 2017 can wait until next year. CDOT won't consider it. We are responsible for making the designation in our urban area, urbanized area. We have to do it in consultation with CDOT, and kind of the unofficial word that was, or phrase that was used is, we can designate it, but if CDOT doesn't approve it, FHWA won't accept it. So we do have to work together with CDOT, and they obviously have urban areas that they're responsible for. Dr. Cog has an urbanized area, and we do. So ultimately, the three groups are going to have to figure out how to stay within the 80.35. But right now, what CDOT would hope to get would be what projects and what's their cost from 2016 and 2017.
Great.
Something to point out is CDOT developed the State Highway Freight Network Plan without consultation with us. Actually, the first I heard about it was at STAC, and that was one of my little freak out at STAC. So where did this come from? So the plan that Ken's talking about that the project has to come from was actually developed without consultation or coordination with us. So
They mentioned it as being updated.
it is.
They are
That's the
going.
multimodal. That's the multimodal that's being updated, not the state highway.
That's
No.
what it's going to be.
Oh, that's going to roll into it?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
One is part of the other,
okay.
to answer that question. I mean, the freight network is part of the multimodal freight network.
So it's not just rolling the state highway network into it, it's actually pulling it out and re-looking at it all? Okay.
So Craig, or what the state developed, is that in our 2040 long-range plan?
It would be if there was much in the way of projects in our area, but there aren't.
Are you talking about the
The corridors that were designated?
the designated corridor?
And there's no, the freight projects in Region 2 are primarily out east around, and I get them, Lamar, it's part of the Ports to Plains corridor, things like that, but
I-25?
I-25 it's in all of them because it's the interstate, so I-25 is included, yes.
So a little bit of context. When MAP 21 came out, there was encouragements for freight plans, and that is how we got CDOT's first highway freight plan. Now, in FAST, there's more stringent requirements because there's now the funding pot attached to the freight plan. Make sense?
So I recall about a year and a half ago, CDOT was going through some designation of roadways, and we got at odds with them because we wanted to include roads and they didn't. Can you remind me what that was?
That was the enhanced NHS.
Is that the
That
NHS?
was it.
Yep,
Okay.
it's the NHS system. So,
Victoria?
What is sort of the appropriate number of miles, do we think, for our region that we may have designated by the state?
see, I think that is the key question is how do you do it? I think that freight a lot is generated by population, so 12% of the 80 miles then, actually be a little more than that, because it's urban miles. So do it that way. If you do CDOT, falls back a lot on state highways, and which we're handicapped by state highways. You could go to national highway system miles and do it that way, and then we're jumping up to about 10%. Of the statewide total would be higher of the urban, because the urban is a subset. I think that's the question. On the flip side,
14.7 doesn't seem outrageous for our region. Do we even want to cut it back when, Dr. Cogg's looking at 200 plus? We have 14. Wendy.
So based on a meeting that I was at this morning before I came up to the Springs, the projects that are going to go in 16 and 17 are projects that are ready to go because the money is ready to be spent. So what you have here, we have done some thorough vetting. We have looked at them, and we know that there's a lot of what's on this list has funding, so it would allow us to add to that project, and we could build this instead of this. So I think that what you've got here is good. I don't know that you need to go down the Dr. Cog road, because all that's going to happen is that somebody's going to pare it back down to this. And what is your priority? I mean, we looked at this. If this is still a good list, then I think you've done your job. I mean, if there's something else that's on here that's missing that has priority for you, then I think you need to add it, definitely.
Greg?
I see this as the 14 you see there as the tier 1. If we wanted to develop a tier 2, we could. But what I think you see there is what I would consider to be the tier 1.
And you have time to do to do a tier 2. You don't have to do that right now, because again, this is something that will be updated regularly.
So if we wanted to leave this list as it is, we just need cost estimates? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. And probably what year, 2016 or 17, they're probably going to want that detail.
Okay, we'll take $8 million for Charter Oak in 2017.
That's 50% of the state.
Yeah, just throwing the number out.
Or really
Okay.
either year.
That's not an unrealistic expectation, though, honestly.
We need.
There's 40% truck traffic on that road. It's probably higher than any of these other ones.
Mhm.
In fact, I'll guarantee it
It's
is.
not an unrealistic expectation, so, I mean, whatever is going to come out of the whole process won't be known until we actually have applications that are going to need to be filled out, and there's going to be criteria, and there'll be some way that they score them and so forth and so on. So at this point, the kitchen sink is probably where you need to go, and then we figure out what we put into it in reality.
That's going to be a statewide discussion, and as in, how do you figure out the miles? Put them all together. It's not going to be great. We gave to CDOT. CDOT's going to decide this. That's just the next phase, and you all have opportunity for input in that. So we don't know what it looks like yet, and I think you're thinking large in general, and I think that's exactly the way to go right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Besides Charter Oak Ridge Road, I think all those other projects are really more CDOT led, so that they can.
Could we ask CDOT to provide?
the numbers?
Well,
Tim?
aren't they in the long-range plan? Because we just updated it, and I think the costs were in there.
So I think some of those might be.
Part of bigger corridors,
Process, so they
yeah.
might have an updated number, I don't know.
I get with CDOT on the others. I would agree that we don't want to cut this list down, because this is what we've identified. But we're just going to need to get a little bit more information. And apparently, CDOT's proposal, and if they stick with it, they're not going to do the full designation. They will do that next year, as they develop the freight plan, after they develop the methodology for scoring projects, calling for projects, selecting projects.
We did, although you took the portions of 24 East out of the urban miles, we did have CDOT add them to the rural miles in the Central Front Range.
Okay.
So that we had that connectivity.
And we can certainly make a recommendation on the rural, because
Support that
To
as
support-
the royal, that would be awesome.
However we need to do that at the appropriate time.
Yep,
We-
okay. Thank you.
And this is a discussion.
This is,
Is that the only situation, by the way? Any project areas that
Goes in and out? I think so.
of this list, that's the only one.
Yeah.
So this, again, is a discussion item. Our schedule is to come back next month for a final recommendation. We'll may hopefully know more information. But right now, we might only be identifying the projects that we would request funds in 2016 and 17, and could even wait until later, because there has not, at this point, there has not been any discussion amongst the three entities on how to divide the miles up.
Yeah.
Hasn't even, it's been broached and nobody's had an answer. So that's
Any
all.
other further input for Ken? Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Data Summit recap, discussion item, Craig?
And just want to recap, we had a discussion with, actually, just about all of the entities were represented on Tuesday, and we're going to try to do is put together a series of specs for what kind of data, so like pavement condition, City of Colorado Springs collects X, Y, and Z, El Paso County collects X, Y, and A, PPACG needs A and F or whatever it is, and try to figure out how we can create a repeating data collection, so because we all need a lot of the same transportation data, traffic counts, speeds, crashes, and pavement bridge condition. So let's see, we're going to need it every 4 years. The other entities need it every year, every other year, every third year, whatever it is. See if we can get a program put together of gathering this data that works for everybody, is more efficient, and if we can use some metro money, maybe subsidizes or prevents, opens up some local dollars for other uses. We don't have a lot of money. Well, actually, it is a lot. I think it's around $200,000 in 2017, 2018, and then there's $1 million for our household survey in 2020. That hopefully the survey will cost a lot less than that, and we can use some of those funds for the data gathering also. And then just figure out as we go through the long-range plan process what data we're going to need. So, are there any questions? So,
Request.
yes.
Can I get those 2015 CDOT counts?
Oh, yes. 2015?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get them. I'll talk to John, but yeah, we can get the 2015, all the counts. Okay. Yep.
Craig, just a thought, I mean, that might be something to put into policy too, about taking some money off the top to address some of these regional.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Any other further discussion on data summit recap? So Craig, you'll be sending out an email.
Yep. Yeah, and we're going to try to get all those different specs together, and then I'll make sure the counts go out, if not today, first thing tomorrow.
Okay.
Craig, could you send the 2015?
Yep. Yep. Can totally do that. What is, should it be, what would you go, would you want a shape file? Would you want, what would work best for you all?
What we received previously were Excel files.
Excel? Okay.
That will work for us too.
Both might be good, Craig.
Okay. Okay.
Member entity announcements.
I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Dan Munn, who is the new Park Public Works Director. He's been in the office for 4 days and just come back, so it's a
Wow.
big deal. He comes to us from the District 11 School District, and we're happy to have him.
Okay.
We promise not to call you the new Bill. At least not for too long.
Dan Munn.
Dan, did you want to give us any background or any information on yourself other than what Laura?
Been in construction my whole life, so moved to Colorado from Rochester, New York about 3 years ago. Been with District 11 since then, and then this position opened up and been there for 4 days, and I keep coming back. It's
welcome.
Anything else, any other member entity announcements? Can't believe that there are not any.
They finally announced where our headquarters is going and where our new office is going in Region 2 today.
And
Which is?
So the new office in Denver is going to be south of the Bronco Stadium. There's some kind of redevelopment project going on there. And so, to quote Shayla Butt, he said it's the kingpin piece. And so what that means, I don't know.
is that closer or farther for us, just out of curiosity?
Farther.
Is it? Bummer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Through a lot of Denver traffic.
So, the light rail might be an option, get on at Lincoln and take it up, because the station's right there. And our office is, as we already knew, because the Pueblo chieftain told us so, is going over by Coles, on the other side of Coles. So that way everybody has a
That's
point of
closer.
reference. It's right off, yeah,
It
well,
is closer.
it's closer for you to get to
Right.
Pueblo for it, yeah.
You have to
North
drive
end.
farther from your house
Yeah,
now.
the north end. But yeah, so that's the furthest tip north that you can go, and I live in the furthest tip south that you can go. So that'll be interesting. And I used to live within walking distance. What was I thinking?
Craig?
Just real quick, I think Brian probably reported we have fall service changes that are coming up with transit in September. We're adding some off-peak bus service weekends, weekends. We can't add any peak service till we have more buses, which is a good problem to have. We're finally using all the buses we got. But in order to expand, we have to bring in new buses, which we won't have until end of next summer, summer of 2017. But we're happy to be adding the service.
Anything else?
We had some good news. We actually had 3 bidders for our late advertisement for our resurfacing project this year, and they came within our engineer's estimate, only 10% above last year, which is unusual. And Kiewit was the low bidder, and thankfully they're not working on I-25, so I freed them up to bid on our project.
Alrighty. Anybody else? Moving on to items for future TAC meetings.
Yeah, there'll be the items that were discussion, we're going to be bringing out, hopefully in the next few months, an outline of our long-range plan update process, sort of what we see happening there. I guess that's we're into that part of it now, long-range plan update.
Great. Anything else? We're going to adjourn our meeting. Thanks, everybody.